Art has played a really important role in my life. As a young boy walking through the toy aisles, I was always excited to see all the latest artwork on the packages of my favorite toys, or even as an adult with ADHD, struggling to find something to anchor my mind to my hobby. Art has been key to my development in both learning Dungeons and Dragons and enjoying the hobby. Come on with me and have a look at the artwork that has inspired me. Everybody has different things that inspire them. Artwork, movies, books, graphic novels, comic books, TV shows. For me, growing up, art has always been my anchor. Even to this day, I look to art as a way to just galvanize and really boost my creative energy. Now, throughout the years, there's been some very specific artists that do that very well for me. We're going to take a look at some of those artists now, and I'm going to show you why I like them and what exactly about their style that sort of inspired me to write better stories and tell different stories when I'm playing Dungeons and Dragons. When I first opened up my red box Dungeons & Dragons set in the 80s, I was assaulted by Larry Elmore's art. His black and white spreads and just his character portraits and basic artwork that just sucked me into the world of Dungeons & Dragons. One of the elements of his style I like to call the caught-in-the-moment art style. Larry's artwork is always very subtle. It doesn't exactly capture very high fantasy cinematic elements. You never really see Larry's art in a over-the-top cinematic moment. It always captures the nuance of living in a fantasy world. Most times it's just characters going about their daily lives doing normal things that would happen in a world of Dungeons and Dragons. It's kind of the appeal of it, actually. It allows your imagination to flourish and doesn't necessarily fill in all the details of what's happening. Now, of course, what Larry's most known for is the fact that he was the cover artist on the Dragonlance series of novels in the early 80s, or at least the first trilogy anyway. Now, that's exactly what got me to actually take an interest in Dragonlance to begin with. It wasn't until my later years that I actually started taking an interest in reading the books, but that artwork was the single most important reason why I picked up the books to begin with. Just goes to show you the power of a cover artist, eh? If you came anywhere near a hardcover Dungeons & Dragons book in the early 80s, then you know who Jeff Easley is. Now, he wasn't my first experience with artwork in Dungeons & Dragons. However, Jeff Easley really came into prominence in my life when I started going into the advanced Dungeons & Dragons. All of the hardcover books that I acquired during those years were actually painted by Jeff Easley. Jeff Easley is actually an oil painter as opposed to a sketch artist. All of his artwork was featured prominently in all the Dungeons & Dragons books during the 80s, and even making it all the way up to the second edition of the game. Now, if you were a fan of Jeff Easley, you could find his artwork all over the place. His artwork was almost the opposite of Larry Elmore's. While he did capture some of those mundane moments that Larry liked to embrace, Jeff Easley also went on the opposite side of the spectrum and created some pretty stunning artwork. His artwork style was very over-the-top cinematic, and if you wanted to capture that feeling of massive battles or just an epic scene, Jeff Easley was your guy. Now, just because Keith Parkinson is third on my list doesn't mean that he was any less of an influential artist when I was growing up. Keith Parkinson's art kind of low-key just kind of slid under my radar for so many years. He had done work in Dungeons & Dragons, not necessarily on covers of the D&D books, but it wasn't until Rifts in 1991 when I discovered that game that I actually saw the name Keith Parkinson at the bottom of some of this amazing art. Going back in and looking at some of my old D&D books, I realized that he was there, just lurking in the background. Keith Parkinson's art was actually a little bit more of a photorealistic style than, say, Elmore or Easley. His art had a certain vibe to it that, kind of called out as the more realistic side of Dungeons and Dragons. Now, he went on later, obviously, to be very influential in other products besides Dungeons and Dragons, but his work in Dungeons and Dragons included things like a lot of the art in the Dragonlance saga and interior art, as well as the most notable piece of art that stood out to me is the Forgotten Realms box set. And also doing a lot of fantasy novel artwork as well. His art style was such that it was so realistic and so good that you didn't necessarily have a specific style attached to him. He could have done any artwork in any kind of genre, and he was able to bounce back and forth and still deliver an amazing product. His art really was inspiring. Now, sadly, Keith Parkinson died in 2005 at the age of 47 years old. So here I am, a 50-year-old gamer still playing Dungeons & Dragons, and I'm still being inspired by artwork that I see every day. The latest artist that's really galvanized me into playing D&D and pushing my imagination further than it's ever been is an artist by the name of Max Dunbar. Now, I stumbled on Max just simply by reading graphic novels, and it turns out that a Dungeons & Dragons graphic novel that I really enjoyed was illustrated by Max. I went further than that and started looking at some of his actual sketchwork and art that he's actually done and posted to his website. Max's artwork has just been awesome in getting me reinvigorated in playing Dungeons & Dragons with a new generation of players. I've even incorporated some of his art book and some of the homebrew rules and systems that I'm creating to help with visual aids. Max, if you're watching, thanks, buddy. By no means are these artists the only ones that have inspired me in all the years that I've been playing Dungeons & Dragons. And if one of your favorite artists didn't make the cut on my list, be sure to leave a comment and let me know some of the artists that have inspired you throughout all these years playing D&D. I hope you're all having fun playing Dungeons & Dragons out there, and we'll talk to you soon. Before you go, I need your help. I'm trying to grow the exposure of what we do here at Maverick Games. My goal is to actually bring information to parents and students for fun, academics, and even support of neurodivergency. Please subscribe and make sure you click on those notifications. I don't do paid ads or sponsorships. I hope that you can find content here that's enjoyable for yourself and maybe others. Thank you very much, and thanks for tuning in.